Mike McCall, Chairman Mike McCall of Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I chair the Homeland Security Committee. One thing I've found time and time again is that terrorism thrives in failed states, in poverty, in safe havens. Unfortunately, Africa has many of those as we look at Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb. And I think we've made some progress. Millennium Challenge has been helpful. The Gates Foundation, I've met with Bill Gates. The One Campaign is trying to move forward in this development of Africa. My first question, General, is to you. I visited Camp North in the Sinai Peninsula, where ISIS is prevalent. Then went to Tunisia, visited with the Libyan team. Libya is still very much a strong threat to the homeland in terms of the number of ISIS, as is Sinai. General Haftar in the east, and then you have General Siraj in Tripoli. It seems to me if the military can't get it together, then you can't have governance, and if you can't have governance, then you have terrorism. Can you tell us where we are with that, and what can we do more to foster a unified government in Libya?
Yeah, thank you, Congressman McCall. And obviously, my understanding of it is from a position of afar, not directly involved these days. However, there are some things that I think are substantially important to moving along in these regions that you've described. To be sure, fragile states, failing states are breeding grounds for nefarious activities of all sorts: human trafficking, narcotics trafficking, certainly terrorist havens for training and exporting that violence globally. Where we, as the United States of America, are involved in a sustained way to, one, help security forces who are responsible for their own territories be better prepared to do that, makes a difference. Equally important is our engagement from a developmental perspective to cause those who are living in those areas to see what I call this horizon of hope, because where they are, there are things being done for them by their government and by those who would support their attempts to have things provided from a literacy perspective, from a health perspective, that will help increase their ability to live the way that we, as any human being, would want to live.
And I agree, but how do we get these two generals to work it out? I mean, that seems to be the key problem in Libya to me.
I'll be happy to have a private conversation with you about that.
We have a skiff in the Capitol.
But the essence, sir, is causing their behavior to change, similar to what we see in South Sudan. And until that happens, making progress will be very, very difficult. So causing their behavior to change so that they are less selfishly motivated and motivated for the good of the country.
Thank you.
Opposed to not.
Mr. Christy, so terrorist financing, this is really quite horrific. They're using ivory to finance terrorism in Africa, and I commend what you've done to try to track this down. Can you tell us about the wildlife trafficking bill that this committee passed, how that is helping in this effort, and what more can we do to shut down? And we know that there's cocaine coming in from South America, you know, on the west coast of Africa to funnel and finance this as well. But tell us about the impact of that legislation and what more can we do?
Thank you, Congressman. I think you know, all of this takes more time than we want. That bill was the law was signed, I think, in October of 16. So it's really too early to tell the impact. Certainly, identifying the countries is the next step. The problem countries as traffickers, and that has proved in the ivory world to be significant. So to take it the next step and identify countries that are linked with extremist groups and the trafficking in these materials, ivory, rhino horn, et cetera, will be significant. The world needs diplomatic pressure on these countries to address these problems. These groups, I mean, one of the things that where we could make a big improvement is to look at the ways we've siloed these problems. So we tend to look at wildlife trafficking as a wildlife problem, and we think it's the aegis of biologists to address. We don't do that with cocaine. We don't put botanists in charge of the cocaine trafficking problem. If we move out of the biologist mindset and move to law enforcement, a law enforcement mindset, we begin to change how we think about these problems. We begin to say, so as an example, I was in Garamba National Park, which has been under siege from South Sudanese poachers, LRA, all these bad guys in this area. And I looked at the maps that they had for tracking the poaching groups. And then and they very detailed maps that they pin every day, update. And I had the opportunity to fly over to Central African Republic and spend time with the African Union forces there. And I noticed they had similar maps. And they overlapped. And they had pins in those maps, and with different poacher and extremist group movements. And I said, do you guys talk to each other? No. And so I introduced them, and they began talking, and they had some suspicions about the activities of the other. The park rangers suspected the Ugandan military was poaching from helicopters. So two things happened. One, we were able to clear up that to their satisfaction, and two, they could begin exchanging intel. And that sort of intelligence sharing is critically important.
I'm well beyond my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry.
Thank you.